Okay, we're beginning a new discussion. About a little more than halfway down the page on 19b. And we're at Omer of Tuvi Bar Kisna, Omer Shmuel. Okay, and again, just brief review from the end of yesterday. The question here is regarding how to minimize a window. Like we explained yesterday, if you have tumah in a house and there isn't a clear path about how the tumah will exit, and the tumah spreads throughout every single potential exit. And one of those is a window. How big is the window? It's 1 tefach by 1 tefach square. Now, let's say there are things in the window. They minimize the size of the window. So what type of things are eligible to minimize the window? So Omer Shmuel says, Rokik, this is like a donut, a cake. It does not shrink the size of the window. So you have a window that's a tefach square. The guy puts a piece of cake inside the window. Tumah still leaves. Tumah still goes out of the window. So Gemara says, why specifically a piece of cake? I feel ovanami, even if it was, let's say, a thick dough, something like a bread or a cookie, right? So a cake is a liquid batter. So we call bebli raka, or a donut. It's the same idea. I shouldn't say that a donut is not a thick batter. A donut's a thick batter, but a cake would be a thin batter, or a cookie. You know, both of them should be the same. Why did he specifically choose to pick a cake? Someone says, Someone says, look, if you put a cookie in the window, it's much easier to ruin a piece of cake than to ruin a cookie. It's very easy to get a cake soiled to the extent that people won't eat it than it is to get a cookie, because a cookie or a piece of bread. It's much firmer and hard, so it doesn't get soiled as easily, or get as thoroughly soiled. But a piece of cake, which is very easy to soil, once it's there and it's soiled, then it should be garbage. It shouldn't be left there. Kamash Malon that know that even if it's soiled, it still does not minimize the size of the window. So Gemara says, there's another problem. In order to stop the tumah from leaving, it has to be that we're talking about items that they themselves don't accept tumah. So, for example, let's say you have this window, and in the window, you fill it up with silverware, tableware, right? So you fill it up with forks and spoons. The whole window is filled with forks and spoons. There's no window anymore. The halacha is that all the forks and spoons are tummy, because those items are susceptible to become tummy in the first place. Talking about metal spoons, they're susceptible for tumah. You can't stop the tumah if it itself receives tumah. So the Gemara says, "Shenilish may Paris." Okay, so it's important to understand that food only becomes tamei if it's prepared. What does that mean? It means basically it got wet intentionally. How did it get wet? It got wet with one of 7 eligible liquids. Just briefly, there are wine, milk, honey, oil, dew, water. I'm missing one here. And blood. That's 7. Now, those liquids are quite literal, those specific liquids. May Paris, if you use orange juice, now even though orange juice we know is like mostly water, right? It's a little bit of juice a little bit of juice substance, but most of it's water. Doesn't make a difference. There's no tumah. If you pour orange juice over your fruits intentionally, it doesn't make them susceptible to become tummy. You need only one of those 7 liquids. So if the dough is kneaded with May Paris, with orange juice, it doesn't become tummy. Okay. Meisve, question. Kupa Malaya Teven, V'chavis Malaya Groigris. You had a box that was filled with grain, or a barrel that was filled with figs, Hamunachim Bechaloyin, and these things are placed in the window. The vessel is in the window. Royin Kol Shili Yinotu B'chal Teven Groigris Lam F'Yatzim and Chaytzin, and Lav Ein Chaytzin. Okay, so he puts a barrel filled with sticky figs so now as follows. In if you have a barrel of water and you break the barrel, what happens to the water inside? It spills. But what if you have sticky figs in the barrel? You break the barrel, what happens? Maybe they stay there, maybe they don't. Depends. It's very likely the case that they don't actually need the barrel. And because these figs aren't prepared to receive tumah, so therefore the figs could block the tumah. The barrel can't block the tumah because the barrel is a vessel that's susceptible to become tummy. But the figs inside the barrel are not susceptible, not necessarily. And we're talking about a scenario where they were not susceptible to become tummy. They were dried sticky figs, or it was filled with hay. Same story. No, they weren't wet. They were dry.
Oh, that was the barrel of water.
The barrel of water, bro. Yeah. No, two separate. That was just an example.
Okay.
To illustrate the distinction between something that holds its own form and something that will just immediately leave the barrel. Okay. So in these scenarios, the hay and the figs, if they were packed in such a way that even without the barrel, they'd still block the window, then it stops the tumah from leaving. The imlav ein chaytzin, but if not, it does not stop the tumah from leaving. Just explain again. You have a window. It's 1 tefach square. It's not a big window, not a big barrel there. It's a small Tupperware. It's not like a big thing. It didn't have Tupperware. Okay, and it's filled with figs. Now, and let's say that the figs, for example, were at the interior side of the window, and there was a vessel. Maybe it was a spoon on the exterior side of the vessel. In that case, the tumah is blocked. The spoon is tahor. Another possibility. Actually, not only this thing was so small, it was like it was a graduated cylinder that was filled with figs. Small, but that's fine because the window was 1 tefach square. As soon as we minimize the window just slightly, it could have been a test tube of hay. That was it. That's all you needed. That stops the tumah. So let's say there was adjacent to it, there was a regular cup, a glass cup. That would be fine. The glass cup would be fine because the tumah isn't large enough now to exit. The window, I'm sorry, isn't large enough to exit. Okay. Fine. But tevin chazal behemo. The Gemara says 1 second. But these items, the only time we consider the window to be blocked is when the item that's in the window is left there permanently. If it's something that a person might take in the future, then it's not left there permanently. People are going to remove it. It's not considered to block the tumah from leaving. The idea that you made the window smaller is that the window is permanently smaller. If the window is just, there happens to be something in the window now, it doesn't stop the tumah from leaving because you can take the body out of that window by removing what's in the window. It's only when it's permanently there that we presume that the body won't leave in that direction. So the Gemara says the hay, you got to give it to your animal. So the Gemara says besaria. It's rotten. It's not edible for an animal. So the Gemara says chazilatina. It can be used for cement. So the Gemara says the isba kutzi. There's thorns, and you don't want people to pour the cement to get pricked by thorns. So the Gemara says chazil, you can burn it. B'misuna, it was wet. Chazil has a gadol. You can put it into a very large fire. So the Gemara says lo shkiach. People don't usually save that type of material to burn in a large fire. You don't save wet wood or wet hay to burn a large fire. So Gemara says, okay, well, let's go back to the other one. Groigris. What about the figs? Hachazulei. You can eat it. Or Shmuel b'shehitrifu. They got filled with worms. They got wormy. Okay, fine. So now let's go back to the vessel. Hachavis, the container that's holding the figs. Hey chidami, how is it laying inside the window? Ida puma labar. If the barrel had its mouth to the exterior side, higu fetechatz. The klicheres enim tam migabai. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a moment to understand the new idea. The regular vessel receives tumah by a person touching it. whether that person touched it from the inside or the outside. There's a unique feature to a klicheres that actually doesn't receive tumah by touching. If you touch the exterior of it, it does not become tummy. It only becomes tummy by things going into its airspace. It's a very unique law. So, for example, let's say you tie a dead mouse, which is one of the 8 shrotzim, the 8 creatures that create tumah. So you hang a dead mouse into the middle, and it doesn't touch the vessel. The halacha is the vessel is tummy. Now, if you took a dead mouse, and you hung it inside a metal pot, the metal pot is not tummy. There's no tumah. It's a very unique law. Klicheres becomes tummy by the airspace. If you go into the airspace, even if you don't touch it, it becomes tummy. So now, we said in order for it to stop the tumah from going, it itself can't be susceptible to tumah. So now, if the mouth of the vessel is pointed to the exterior, so then it itself is not susceptible to tumah, because the back side of the vessel, meaning the bottom of the vessel, is pointed to the inside. The vessel, it does not become tummy from the inside, from the outside, meaning that if the mouth of the vessel is pointed outward on the exterior, then the bottom of the vessel blocks the tumah from traveling across. El de puma legav. It must be the mouth is on the inside. Another possibility is the mouth is facing the outside. We're talking about a metal barrel. A metal barrel receives tumah from both the inside and the outside. Okay. Meisvei. A person took he took grass and he put them in the window. Or they grew on their own. In the windows. Pieces of material. These pieces of material are so small they don't actually receive tumah. They're smaller than 3 fingers by 3 fingers. So you're talking about smaller than this big, roughly. Va'aver, or if it was lead, v'habasar hamadudel b'behema b'chayav oif. You had a piece of flesh that was sort of hanging off a live animal. We'll talk about it in more detail. Va'oif sheshachan b'chalain, and a bird that rested in the window. Or a non-Jew that was sitting in the window. Uben shmoina hamunach b'chalain, a baby who was born after 8 months. The rabbis consider this baby to certainly die, even if the baby was either born still, or the baby would certainly die if it was born at 8 months. Doesn't appear that we have such a phenomenon today. B'chalain v'hamelach, v'hamelach, or if there was salt. Uklicheres, or there was an earthenware vessel. V'sefer Torah, or a Torah scroll. Kulam mima'atim b'chalain. They all minimize the size of the window. Okay, but we'll soon see. It sounds very simple now. We'll soon see that all of these have very complicated scenarios. It's not actually that there's grass in the window. It's much more complicated than that. Okay, aval, what doesn't minimize the size of the window? Hashelag, if you have snow. The haborad, if you have hail. The haglid, if it's ice. Kfar. Probably translate kfar. Second. Okay, there it is. It's okay. So glid is frost, kfor is ice. V'hamayim and water. Kulam einu madim b'chalain. None of these minimize the size of the window. You probably can guess why, because all these things they're going to run off. The fact it's a block of ice or frost, or even if there's the water eventually will run down. So it does not minimize the size of the window. So now the Gemara asks, each of these items they're not permanent. They're there temporarily. Va'asavim, the grass, chazol behemtoi, can be eaten by the animals. So Gemara says, ba'afrasta. Afrasto seems to be a poisonous grass. So the Gemara says, okay, so the grass is going to be there permanently because nobody's going to take it. It's poison. So the Gemara says, the grass grew in the window. So the Gemara asks, because it could damage the wall, somebody will remove it. Right? If a guy has, grass growing on his roof or some, moss or whatever it is, he's likely to remove it to make sure it doesn't damage the roof or the wall. So the Gemara says, we're talking about a condemned property, a ruin. So there's this old ruin, and there is tumah in the ruin, and the guy, and there's grass growing in the windows. That type of grass nobody's going to touch. Okay, Papa says, I feel because of Yishuv. We could be talking about the wall that's a normal wall of a normal house. We're talking about a scenario where the grass didn't actually grow in the window. The grass was growing in the property a little bit, 3 tefachim away from the window, and it grew into the window. So it sort of filled the space of the window with the grass that was growing on the ground. Okay, so again, it's also not likely to be cut. Matlunios, these small pieces of material, chazle lekriya de lavusha. It can be used for to a patch, right? So the Gemara says, in other words, if your clothes rip, it can be used to patch the clothes. So the Gemara says, b'samichta, it's very thick. It's not going to be easily used for a patch. So the Gemara says, chazil umda, it can be used for a bloodletter to make a bandage. So the Gemara says, beriska. It's a very rough material. So this is like the worst thing for a wound. It's going to make the wound even bigger. So Gemara says, iberiska, it's rough material. Okay, so now what's the minimum size material for tumah? If it's material that's used for a garment, it's 3 by 3. But if it's a rough material, it would be used for a sack. What's the minimum amount for a sack? 4 by 4. So why does it say 3 by 3 should be 4 by 4? So the Gemara says ke'en riska. No, it's material that's used for clothing. It just happens to be thick, and for whatever reason, it was very rough material. So it wouldn't be used as a bandage. But the minimum quantity for tumah is still 3 by 3. So you have a limb or flesh from an animal that's hanging in the window. So Gemara says, well, what do you think is going to happen? Arka, the animal will run away. So whatever's in the window now is not going to be in the window for a very long time. So Gemara says, Bikshura, the animal's tied up next to the window, and either a limb or flesh is hanging inside the window and minimizing its size. So Gemara says, Shachet law, he's going to slaughter it. Bitmea, it's a non-kosher animal. So Gemara says, Mizavan lo l'nachar, you'll sell it to a non-Jew who will slaughter it. So Gemara says, B'krusha, it's such a weak animal that there's actually no money in its flesh. So the Gemara says, Patzik shadla l'klavim, he'll cut the piece of meat and give it to the dogs. So the Gemara says, Kiva niket tzar malachayim lo yavet, because the flesh and the limb is still attached to the animal, it's going to cause more pain to the animal. So therefore, he won't cut it off and throw it to the dogs. Okay, next one. There was a bird who was sitting in the window. Gemara says, what do you think a bird's going to do next? Parach v'azal, it will fly away. Gemara says, b'kosher, it was tied down. Gemara says, shachet lei, he'll slaughter it. B'tamei, it's a non-kosher bird. Rezavan lei l'nachri, he'll sell it to a non-Jew. B'kalnisa, it's a very weak bird. It's the type of bird that you wouldn't want to slaughter. Like one of these city pigeons, looking weak. It's not an animal that you suspect is filled with diseases. Gemara says, Yov leili nuka, so you'll give it to a kid to play with. Gemara says, Misaret, it has a big beak, it has very long toenails, and it's gonna scratch the kids. Gemara says, Kalnisa le Misaret, this type of bird called the Kalnisa, a very sick bird, it's not able to scratch. So the Gemara says, no, it's not actually this type of bird, it's Ke'en Kalnisa. It's like a very ill very ill sick bird, but it also has the ability to scratch. So there's no use to the bird, and therefore you'll let it sit in the window until it dies. Okay. You have a non-Jew that sits in the window. He'll get up and move. Gemara says bekafos. He was tied down. I guess he was in prison or something. He was tied down to the window. Gemara says his friend will come along and untie him. Gemara says mitzvah. He's a leper. Nobody wants to go near those. So the Gemara says, yeah, well, his friend who's a leper will come to him and untie him. Okay, so Gemara says the king ordered him to be in this type of prison, locked up in this window, and therefore nobody will go ahead and untie him. So Gemara says the mother will come along and take the kids. So Gemara says b'Shabbos. It's on Shabbos. Tanya ben Shmoyna Areu Evan also taught b'Shabbos. The 8-month child is certainly going to die, and therefore we consider it to be like a dead body even before it actually dies. You can't. It's muktzah. You can't touch the child. But the mother is allowed to nurse the child because of the pain that the mother has by not being able to nurse. Okay. Okay, so that's why the child is sort of a dead body, or even if it's alive, it will die soon. Is in the window and it won't move. So the Gemara says melach, salt, chazile. You can use the salt. B'merurta, it's a very bitter salt. Chazilo iris, it's good for tanning. This bakutzi, it has thorns in it, and the guy doesn't want to tan with it because it will ruin it will hurt his fingers. So the Gemara says keeping the kashal kaisel shakla, the salt will ruin the wool. It will corrode it. So he'll take it away. So the Gemara says the yasva chaspa. It's on top of a piece of pottery. So the Gemara says chaspa gufei techotz. Let the piece of pottery itself serve as a barrier. So the Gemara says the lesbe shura. The piece of pottery, the window is a little larger than 1 tefach by 1 tefach. The piece of pottery would not serve as a barrier because it doesn't take up enough space. It doesn't minimize the size of the window significantly. But with the salt on it, it would minimize the window. And again, this is not just salt. This is salt that's filled with thorns and bitter. Okay, Kiddushnan Cheres K'dei Litnan Ben Patzam L'Chaveri. I'm sorry. 1 second. I'm sorry. The explanation here is that the cheres, the earthenware material itself, is too small to block tumah, because it's the minimum size of a earthenware vessel is to serve as a barrier in between the window slats, so to block the air, to block the light that's coming into the house. If you can fit it between the slats, that's considered a significant size. One second. Okay. So Mara says klicharas. One of the things that could create this barrier is a earthenware vessel. Well, chazilei, it's useful. Why is it in the? Why do you think it's going to be in the window for a long period of time? Maybe I'll take it immediately. So Mara says dimatanif. It's very dirty. So Mara says chazilo umna. It could be useful for a bloodletter, so you could fill it with blood, which obviously doesn't care if it's dirty. The Gemara says diminakiv. It has holes in it. Okay, next one. Sefer Torah. There's a Torah scroll inside the window. Chazil mikra. The guy's going to take it out to read. So Gemara says bebluye. It's worn down, and it's not, you can't read from it anymore. So Gemara says it needs to be hidden. So Gemara says shanta heknizasa. The burial place of it is in that window. But Rav says, but b'chol oisin mechitza chutz mimelach u'revav. You can make a window. You can make a barrier to block tumah out of anything except for salt and fat. And the reason is because with time, these things will get minimized. The water will come, or the heat will come, and either wash away the salt or melt the fat. So it won't take up the size that it takes up now. It will shrink in size. With Shmuel says, "I feel a melach, even salt. You can make a barrier for tumah out of salt." Omer of Papa of Loy Pligi, and Papa says they don't disagree. Haba melach staimis, haba melach is the rukness. 1 second. Yeah. So the salt of Sedoim, that's a very large salt. It's very tough and firm, and it won't get washed away by the water. The regular salt, melach is teruknis, that will get washed away. The hashdam rabba oisa adam shnei tzivur melach umeyechalem kaira shar melach mamedes sakara bakara mamedes samelach afilu melach is teruknis v'lei pligi hadik a kaira like a kaira. Okay, so Rabba says like this. Let's say a guy has a courtyard, right? And he wants to make a eruv on Shabbos. He wants it to be permitted to carry in the courtyard. So what does he do? He creates what's called a tzuras haPesach. So the courtyard you think of as a property that's surrounded by a fence. And what he does is he builds a wall, he builds a stick on one side, a stick on the other side, and he lays a beam across. Now, what did he make these support posts out of? He made them out of salt. Put very large blocks of salt, and then he put a beam over it. So Rabba says in that scenario, the beam supports the salt supports the beam, but the beam also prevents the salt from being washed away. It's like a thick beam. It sort of prevents the water from dripping directly onto it. So according to Rabba now, even in the window, if there's a beam on top of the salt to prevent the salt from being washed away, then Rabba would recognize that as a barrier as well. Okay, and that was the complete tangent that had nothing to do with what we were discussing. That was whether and which materials and how the tumah gets blocked from going through a window. Okay, now we get back onto the subject. We are on Chafam Beis 20b, about a quarter of the way down the page. You distance the mill 3 from the base, which is 4 from the top. My time, I'm Mishum Tiria, because of the shaking. The mill shakes. This is a hand mill. But Tanya, we learned for a donkey mill, you do 3 from the bottom, which is 4 from the top. I'll get these. Just get the exact wording here. Okay, it's it's 3 tvachim. The way they translate these words, 3 tvachim from the frame of the bottom of the mill, and 4, which is 4 tvachim from the hopper, which feeds the mill. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Hasam my tarya ikka." Apparently, the vibration of a donkey mill is far less than the vibration of a regular mill. My guess is because it operates much more slowly. So a regular mill, you're just spinning a millstone, so that creates much more vibration. The donkey mill, so you have a much larger, heavier millstone, so you're not doing as many vibrations. The oscillation of the vibrations is a much wider frequency, not the tighter frequency that you get with a hand mill. So the Gemara says, "Elamishim kola." The Gemara says, "You're right. It's for a different reason. It's because of the noise. Apparently, the donkey mill makes a lot more noise, or equivalent amount of noise, to a hand mill." Okay, the oven, it's 3 from the bottom, which is 4 from the top. So we see from here, tefach. The ideal slope of a tanor is 1 tefach, right? So it goes up and then it goes inward. It tilts inward 1 tefach in each direction. So it's 2 tefachim total. Okay, and if you look at the pictures, a tanor typically is a cylinder that tapers toward the top, and that taper is 1 tefach for the height of the tanor of the oven. What's the difference? That ideally, when you sell a tanor, when you sell this type of oven, you should create them with the slope of 1 tefach in each direction. Okay. Says the Mishnah. Okay, so again, this parak is about damaging your neighbor. Right. So now what do you have? Right, like we said, I think we said this in Shabbos. The famous story, the guy was in the ship, right? He rented a cabin, he started drilling a hole in the base of the ship. Can't do that. Sink the whole ship with you. Similarly, if two people share a property, this is like the when we lived in Shadow Hills. My kids, kids are kids, and they would run around in the morning, and then the neighbors, they'd bang the ceiling with a broomstick to get us to stop. So obviously, there are these neighbor disagreements between people that live at multiple levels. So what are the rules? If the person has an upstairs neighbor, he cannot build an oven inside his house unless his house has 4 amas on top of the oven. Let's say he's installing his oven in the upstairs. There has to be 3 tfachim of limestone of cement supporting his oven, because his oven is going to create a tremendous amount of heat. It's also very heavy. You don't want it's like installing a fish tank. You got to have an engineer and make sure that the joists can hold the heavy item. So you have to have that. That's basically what the Mishnah is saying. You have to have 3 tfachim thick of stone, of cement. Ubekira. Okay, a tanor is a high heat oven. It creates a tremendous amount of heat. Kira is the version that's roughly analogous to what we have as a burner. So we have obviously we have a grid, and we have propane or natural gas coming right through it. But the olden days, in times of yore, they had a earthenware structure that had a burner for pots, and then there was a fire underneath it. Usually had a burner for 2 pots, and sometimes you even had a chimney so the smoke can get out. You put the fire underneath, and you were able to cook on top of it like a burner. So this structure first of all creates a lot less heat, and second of all, because it creates a lot less heat, it's also much lighter. It doesn't weigh as much. So then tefach, it only requires 1 tefach of thickness. The im hizik, but here's the critical rule: even though you're permitted to install it, you're permitted to install the oven, or on the first floor or the second floor according to the rules. Im hizik mashal masha hizik. That does not exempt you if it causes damages. Typically, the rule is that we allow you to install a dangerous item, provided that you put enough distance, and if it does damage, it's not your fault, and you're exempt. But with regard to the oven, either in the upstairs or in the downstairs, you're responsible for the damages. Shimon says, what do you mean? Why are we giving you these measurements? To tell you that this is your responsibility. If something happens beyond what's normal, then you're not liable. We saw this mission previously. The person has an upstairs storage. What's he storing in his storage house? He's storing wine, grain, and oil. The guy downstairs cannot open up either a bakery or a dyeing shop to color clothing. And he also can't use it as a barn to deal with the manure. It's smelling. The truth of the matter is that they permitted it with wine because wine was typically stored in earthenware amphora, and therefore the smoke would not penetrate. But they still prohibited it with a barn because it still would make that smell, and it would ruin the wine. So if the guy was storing wine upstairs, that was a storehouse, then they'd allow the guy downstairs to open up a bakery or a dyeing shop. The Gemara says, "Vatanya b'tana arba b'kira shleisha." We said an oven is 4 tefachim worth of limestone. I'm sorry, the Mishnah says that an oven is 3 tefachim of limestone, and a kira, a burner, is 1 tefach. But there's a brayso here that says no. An oven's 4, a burner is 3. So we're talking about a professional oven or a professional burner. These items are much, much heavier than the normal. It's like the difference between kitchen appliances and commercial appliances. They're much bigger, they're much more sturdier, they're much heavier, they're built to last a lot longer, they have more heat in them. And therefore they require more structural support. Our oven, meaning a retail oven, is like the commercial size burner. Okay, Tana, Imhaya Refes Kademis La'itzer Mutter. If the barn came before the storehouse, then it's permitted. One is allowed to, if the if the barn came before the storehouse, then the guy who owns the barn is not permitted to remove the barn. So okay, let's basically the next few questions of the Gemara are the guy made preparations to turn this into an Eitzer, and then his friend quickly went in and built a barn. So how do we know? First thing is kibbud v'ribitz. He started sweeping the floors. What's the story? Ribu bechalonis. He installed more windows, so it'd be useful as a warehouse. He built a porch to get up to it, a set of steps. He built an attic on top of his roof to put a storehouse. Unresolved. If a guy stores, instead of storing, like I said before, grain, wine, or oil, he starts storing dates and pomegranates. Apparently, these things aren't as damaged by smoke and by smell. So Gemara says, Teku, it remains unresolved. Okay. Let's just finish the next Mishnah. With wine, the smoke actually the smoke downstairs when it's in the sealed barrels can actually improve it. But if you put a barn, it creates a smell and that damages the wine. Rav Yosef says, our wine is not like this wine. In other words, the Gemara is saying that in the Mishnaic times, smoke was good for the wine. But already in the Talmudical times, smoke was very bad. Even the smoke of a candle was bad for the wine. They were that careful. Aspasta is a type of animal feed, and that has the same problems of a barn house. So if you're using it